Hi, this is Lorraine Watry. Thanks for joining me today. This video is going to be a time lapse of the painting you are currently looking at, my painting Coral Chorus Line. And it's been a while since I did that painting, but I will try to discuss how I went through creating the painting and my process. So this is going to be about an hour-long video because of the time that I spent on this painting, which was probably somewhere between 40 to 60 hours. And this is a full sheet painting. It is on a piece of 22 by 30 paper, and then I have it stretched, so I've got the borders, so it's probably, without looking at the actual size, it's probably about 20 by maybe 28. And the image that I'm using was from the Denver Zoo, and I had taken multiple pictures when I was there, and I loved to paint birds and I loved to paint flamingos, and I really liked all of the coral colors in this painting. And I did manipulate some of the foreground bird on the left and added some feathers to the right side from another bird so that I would have a way to move the viewer through the scene. The three heads of the flamingos are at an angle, and they kind of move you around the painting. So what I did first of all is I played with my mixes for corals, and some that I ended up using were straight from the tube, and then some were created by mixing reds and yellows. And if you pause the video, you might be able to see some of my mixes or my notes to myself on the tape on the right. And I often do that when I'm doing a painting, partly because when you're working on something, you might step away from it and come back a week or two later or a few days later, and then you might have forgotten what you did. So it can be really helpful to either write notes on the side of your painting border or on a piece of paper, or take swatches of the colors you're using and paint those and then put the color mix beside it. And just getting into that process of keeping track of what you're doing can really be helpful. So as you saw, I started this painting with the lighter peachy colors. And at this point, what I am doing is basically giving myself a roadmap. I'm trying to map out where those lighter colors are, kind of where some of the feathers are, and I will be going back and adding layers. The grays that are in that background bird, a little bit of a purpley gray, that might be Alvaro's fresco, and that is a gray that leans toward purple. And now you can see that I am starting to add some darker values. And also I'm changing my coral mix. So sometimes it's a cooler, slightly pink mix, and then sometimes it's warmer and more toward orange. Here I'm wetting that section of the bird's head. Often with feathers, you might have soft feathers that are the little feathers that are soft and fuzzy. And then you also might, with birds, have feathers that are flight feathers, so the long, stiffer feathers, I guess. And just, again, playing with color mixes. And you can see, because I wet that area first, it did give me soft edges and blurry shapes. And then, even though sometimes I try to do that in one pass when I wet an area, sometimes I do have to come back and add more color or just more texture to an area. On this painting, I did mask some parts of the painting. So the highlights on the bird's eyes were masked. There's little dots in the water that were little bubbles, and so those are currently masked. And then there were a few edges of feathers here and there, or the middle of a feather that I might have masked. And the reason I have that piece of plastic on the upper right, some of you may have guessed, But because those birds are lighter and nice and bright color, I don't want to accidentally fling some of my water as I'm cleaning my brush onto that section. So I just oftentimes will use a sheet protector and place it where I need to protect things. Sometimes I will have it under my hand as I'm painting as well. So I got the water going, and unfortunately I did not have video of the first part of that, or my camera didn't work or something. So the water in this painting, which is a little hard to see in the photo, is actually green. And the first layer was that lighter green, and then I came back and started adding the shadowed part of the water in there. And I needed that darker value back there, even though I hadn't gotten very far with the birds yet. For me, at that point, I wanted to make sure that the values that I was placing on the bird's feathers were going to work, that I had light enough values, and then as I work in the painting that I will be adding dark enough values. So at some point as I'm doing a painting, I do like to add a darker value somewhere on the painting. And you can also see that I worked on the back bird's beak and added the black to the beak, and a little bit of worked on the eye a little, and that helps me as I'm working through something. If I get a little more information in some area, even though that might be a finishing touch for some people, to see maybe the bird's face come to life with that eye started can help me feel like it's going well, and then again that encourages me to continue. So I'm starting to continue working around the painting, and sometimes I'm using a wet on wet approach, and then sometimes I'm painting directly on dry paper. Okay, you can see I've definitely moved on. So this again was something where I didn't have video of that section, and I've darkened the feathers over the middle bird, and as I'm working in there, I'm noticing all of the little value changes and possibly color changes as well. So that bird was started wet on wet with the lightest value. You can kind of see that on the lower left right in there where I'm wetting right now. And I placed that color probably over a majority of that darker peachy area, and then I came back and started painting some of those darker feathers and leaving some of that lighter value in there. So when you're doing a watercolor, especially if it's a realistic scene or you're wanting to slowly kind of find your way through the scene, doing layers can be very helpful. And right there, I added some water to the neck, and then I painted down below that water so that I would have a softer upper edge. But you can see that coming back over earlier layers can increase the value and also can add texture and change color too if you need to. One of the things that I do as I'm working on a painting is I don't work hours and hours and at one time. I will often work on it for maybe 20 minutes to a couple hours, and then I usually will step back from it. So I might go do something else, come back and look at it again with fresh eyes. Sometimes I will carry it around as I'm doing other things in the house or studio, and I will just kind of glance at it every now and then, and that can really help me get an idea if the values are working and maybe what I want to work on next as well. And so here I am adding kind of a muted purple to that peachy color, and that was one of the things that I needed to decide for this painting, was how I wanted to paint the shadowed colors for the birds and still make it look like it was in shadow but not get too muted with my shadows. So for peachy colors, a purple or a muted purple is a good way to do that. Also, I did use, on the darker orange bird, or coral bird, I used muted mixes of that coral color. So you make your coral and then you put a little purple in it, or a little bit of a red that leans toward purple, and that can help mute or make them not as vibrant, but you can create darker shadows with them. So every now and then you might see me place water on the paper first, and again that's either to give me time to paint in that area, because a bigger shape can be harder to move around and get paint on, and then sometimes it is to cause softer edges. Sorry about the glare on the photo at this moment, but the bird I'm working on right now, you don't actually see the face of this bird, but those feathers are a really nice backdrop to the foreground bird and separate it from the middle bird, and they are warmer. So that worked really well in the sense of composition, because those feathers, as you come forward in a painting, that warmer value will come forward and help give some dimension and some depth to the scene. So it's nice that that bird was where it was at in my photo. And by the way, when I'm taking a photo, I'm often thinking in my head, okay, I want to kind of place the bird's head at that grid. If you haven't heard of it, you basically divide your scene into 3 vertically and horizontally, and where those lines cross, those positions are good places to put a center of interest. And so I often compose in my camera, and then sometimes I do have to make some adjustments. And when I'm taking pictures, I will often take 20 to 100 to more than 100 of an area or a scene, so that I have options and I can work with what I see. So for this bird, I did need to come back into it several times, and I'm starting to build the shadows and some of those layers and separate the bird's head from some of the area around it. I think I also, for this painting, when I added that bird in the foreground, I think it was from the same photo or one right at that same time when I was taking my pictures, I increased his size just a little bit. So having that bird be slightly larger than the birds that were farther back, that also helps with the sense of depth and relationship to the foreground as compared to the background for the viewer. All right, and so then this bird is getting some of those first layers. Right there, you might have noticed I had a different brush, and that was my mop brush. So if you're working on a section and maybe your moisture level of that area is not the same as your painting, maybe you put a little too much water on your brush, you can use a mop to equalize those areas. And I have a video that talks about using a mop brush. And if you don't know, for any channel that you go to on YouTube, each of those channels you can find the little magnifying glass for their channel and on their homepage, and then you can type in whatever you're looking for on a channel. And oftentimes, if they have something that falls under that category, you can look that video up and find a video relating to what you're trying to know or trying to learn, trying to know. Good English. All right, so that foreground bird, I wanted those feathers to be there, but to be very subtle. So I painted it wet on wet. I think I came back a couple times and adjusted things here and there. It was very highlighted in the scene because the sun had hit that bird's feathers. And so that helped me keep the focus not at the foreground, but it was there, and your eye then moves back through the birds and doesn't get stuck in that foreground with too much detail. So I wanted that foreground bird on the left to be minimal detail. And if you don't notice, I don't think I put any of the drying time or blow drying in this video. Most of the time what I will do is work on different sections after I've painted something and not dry it with a blow dryer, but I do let sections dry. So where I had been painting on those foreground feathers, I gave it time to dry before I touched that area. So I'm not actually leaning on damp paper when I was painting that bird's head. Adding to the texture, and so I pulled out a purple, and I was continuing to work in that section. So I wet that neck, and then I would go in and just add some paint here and there. You don't always have to put color over the whole area when you've wet an area. You can just paint in places. So you're adding some texture and some value, but not necessarily the whole thing. The other thing I do, which you just saw me do, is I will take process pictures. So as I'm working on a painting, I start from the very beginning and I start taking pictures here and there along the way. And so then that will help me as I'm looking at the painting. Sometimes I need to just get away from it, and maybe I'm doing other things, and I can go back and look at my pictures and I can just kind of flip through them and see how it's going. Maybe I need that for my newsletter that I put out, or for classes. If I teach something related to this, I could use some of those images. I've had some articles in a couple of art magazines, and so having some of those photos that explains my process has been beneficial. So there are multiple reasons why you might want to take pictures of your painting as you're working. Plus, I think it makes you think of what you're working on. It makes you just pause and step back. And also seeing your image as a smaller image and not looking at that big painting can help you see the values and the colors and see if everything is working. So you could see I did go back and I did add another layer to the neck of that bird. We tend to, as individual artists, we tend to want to paint kind of mid-value most of the time, and we forget to leave things and leave them be light enough or to go dark enough. And so I found for myself that when I erred on the side of pushing things darker than I thought they might need to be or what I had them at first, that did help me overall in my artwork to make things pop better, and just compositionally they were much stronger. So if you're wondering the colors I'm using, I do have on my website, I have a list of on my palette and my blog. I don't know if it's up to date. I'll try to look and see if it is. So I can show you what's on my palette currently. Some of those did get added when I was working on this painting in the orange range. And I don't know if I ended up using, I think I used it from my palette. There was a little bit of green water peeking through. Because when I was testing my colors and trying to figure out what I might use for this painting, I had a separate palette that I placed a variety of oranges and pinks and yellows, and I did mixes from that separate palette to try to decide what I wanted to use. The other thing you might look for on my website besides the blog, and so I have a variety of things listed in my blog. I do have video lessons that were originally online classes. There's currently 6 of those, I believe. And if you were interested in working through a painting, not this specific one, but others, then you can check out that under my classes page. At the bottom of the page, it lists those different videos. And I do teach classes and workshops, and those are also listed. So currently I have some available at my studio, and then others that will be on location in different states starting again in the new year. Oh, and I do also have an online class that I will be doing in October, I believe. So as I'm working around the painting, I continue to look at the different things, and if I feel like something needs some more value to it, even if it's not in my photo, whether it's lightening an area or darkening an area, you do have to work with what your painting is showing you. So if you feel like something needs to be adjusted so that maybe the bird's neck stands out better, or maybe you don't want some of those feathers to stand out as much, don't feel like you are attached to your photo so much that you have to copy it exactly. My photos are a reference, and so when I'm working from them, it gives me an idea of the overall color and shapes and design, but I am not so attached to it that I don't make changes if I need to. So that bird's neck on that lower right is a lot darker than what I currently have, and so I had started to adjust that lower area. I'm not sure why I didn't do the upper section at the same time, but maybe what I was doing was the part of the neck that was in the highlighted section at that point. It looks like from this part of the video that I did go back and just added basically the same colors and value to the upper part of the neck. Maybe at first I thought I would do a darker value from the beginning of that upper section, but I guess I decided not to. And then as I start to get more and more paint on a painting, then I will start to add details here and there. So sometimes you might have teachers or people that work with watercolor that will basically kind of build the whole painting as they're going. So they basically get color everywhere, and then they might start to slowly describe the different sections and put in the details. There may be also artists, depending on their style and or how detailed something is, they might work in a section and get that whole section completed and then move on to another section. So there's not necessarily this is how you should work across a painting. So for this one, it worked best for me to find my way and get in enough detail in places that I could then decide, okay, is that working? Do I need to adjust something? And that black beak, I tend to use phthalo blue and a green shade, phthalo blue green shade, and permanent alizarin crimson for the beaks. I do not know if that was my mix for this one because I was playing with different mixes, so I may have adjusted what I used. And yeah, just getting that black beak in, that starts to help me know if I need to adjust feathers around it. The brushes I use are silver black velvet. So the majority of my brushes are those. They are from a company that is, the company is silver, and black velvet is the brand of, or the model of those watercolor brushes. And for this big painting, I think right now I have in my hand my number 20, which is my biggest, and it is the biggest round brush that they have available. They do have flats, and they have other kinds of tips to their brushes depending on what you're looking for. And yeah, I really like them because they're a blend. So they have both synthetic and natural hair. Also, in my video listing underneath the videos, I have an affiliate link that lists a lot of my supplies on my website, and there is, just so you know, there is a little bit of a commission from all those links go to Amazon. So there is a little bit of a commission that I get, but it doesn't cost any more for you. And so if you're interested in what's on my supplies on those affiliate links, you can find that through that link below the video in the description. Same thing with the bird's feathers on that right side. So we're seeing just the feathers that are kind of ruffled and fluffed up, but we're not seeing the body or the head of that bird. So I also wanted those to be soft focus and muted, and so I did those wet on wet. And you can see the bird on the left. I'm now coming back and adjusting and adding some more to that side. I wanted to take that side and the front area kind of slow because I was building that and I didn't want it to be too in your face. Basically, I wanted it to just be kind of subtle, like I mentioned, so that it was there but didn't pull too much attention. And I think I did take out a little more white than what's actually in the photo. So that's where I varied from my photo and wanted it to be a little less intense. So if you have a lot of white in an area and darks around it, that can pull a viewer's eye. Also, if you have a lot of detail or bright color in an area, that can also pull a viewer's eye. So those are good things to have in your center of interest. Okay, so we're about halfway through on this video, so you can kind of see where I am. Again, like I mentioned, this painting was somewhere between 30 to 60 hours. And so I'm still getting rid of the white of the paper, and I'm almost there. And then I can start going back and making adjustments, adding shadows, adding texture, adding more value in places. And a lot of the time, that next half of the painting is where you might need to step back more often. You can also take a picture of your painting and change it to black and white so you can see if your values are working. Color can often confuse our eyes and make us feel like we've got strong values, the highlights, the mid values, and the darks. So it's a good idea to take that photo every now and then and just using some software on your phone or transferring it to your computer and changing it to black and white can be really beneficial to help you see those values if you need to. So some of the feathers on that foreground section, lower right, that are supposed to be soft focus, right now where I'm painting, they have become hard-edged in parts of it because I was painting that darker value around them. So later, and I don't know if I do it now or not, but later I will come back and soften those edges. So don't feel like with watercolor that once you've got something down, it's completely not changeable. You can soften edges, you can lift color. There are certain things that can become really hard to adjust, but watercolor is changeable to a certain extent. So you can see I'm going back and adding some darker value back there to put that in shadow. And there were some shadows down in the green area, so I needed to make sure I put some of that in as well. So within my paintings, usually the background, sometimes little passages in a scene might be a little more abstract or a little impressionistic. So for this painting, it's this foreground. Those feathers are a little more impressionistic, meaning they're not highly realistic and they're a little more stylized. And usually some softer edges here and there, and then also somewhat in the background, though this background is pretty simplistic with just a lighter green and a darker value around that. Some backgrounds can have a lot of texture and color changes and shapes happening in them. So if you're, well, I don't know if I must be putting the photo back on in a few seconds, but I was looking at it without it. As you're looking at my painting, every now and then flipping your eye up to the photo and then back to whatever area you're looking at in the photo when you can see the photo, that can help you and helps me if I'm trying to determine if I need to darken or lighten an area. So it's just a real quick like glance and then back to the painting and then back up to the photo, and that can help me. The other thing that I do is I will look at my painting in a mirror, so I'm basically looking at the image backward, and that takes out some of my preconceived ideas of how I was looking at it before. It makes me notice things that I didn't see turned the right direction, and can be really helpful. You can also turn your painting upside down, stand across the room from it, and just glance at it every now and then. So now that I added that darker value on the leg of the bird, you can see I'm drying it, I have to see if I actually adjust the color around it or if I darken the leg at all. Right now it's okay, but I might want to darken the area around it. I'll see what I do. It's kind of interesting rewatching. So I did darken the leg so it wouldn't stand out as much. And I lifted, so I did go back with a little bit of water on my brush after I put that color on, and I lifted so that I could have a little bit of texture in that area. And then I needed to darken the beak again because I guess it wasn't quite dark enough. And then I'm continuing to build the shadows. So this painting is actually on display. So if you're in the California area and you see this in October, I think, let me check my dates here. I think it's October. It will be on display at the San Diego Watercolor Society exhibition in San Diego. And let me see. So I'm adding some darker values. Probably be better just to, I'm trying to do multiple things on my computer and it's not happy with me. So I am going to go look at my website right quick, which is, by the way, LorraineWatryStudio.com. So this painting will be at the San Diego Watercolor Society's gallery in Liberty Station from October 1st to October 31st of 2023. And it was also juried into the American Watercolor Society's exhibition, I think it was 2022 now, and it was juried into the Birds and Art exhibition, and that's a really big show for bird artists and international. So paintings come from all over the world for that exhibition. I also have videos on my YouTube channel here that talk about stretching your paper. So if you're interested in that process, you can look up stretching your paper under my magnifying glass. So I'm darkening that neck again. So that's probably maybe the 4th or 5th time that I've added a layer. And you can see, oh, sorry about that. Can't really see on this one because it's a little bit off the screen, but I did go back and I added some more color to that bird's head. That bird also, because it is a lighter pink bird, it definitely needed that darker value, but I wanted to be kind of careful with how quickly I darkened it because I didn't want it to go too muted or too dark. Okay, so now I'm adjusting and adding the next layer on this bird's neck. And that might be, I'm guessing, but that might be transparent Perol orange as that darker orange, and then maybe some Quin magenta mixed with it for a more muted mix and darker value. And then I can't tell, I may have just come right back into it right then, or it may have dried and then I came back into it. Now I don't know if you're new to watercolor, you may not have experienced this, but those that have painted with watercolor for a little bit, generally somewhere around 2/3 of the way done with a painting, sometimes it's about halfway, there may be what I call the ugly duckling stage, where you haven't quite got on enough color, maybe you don't have on enough texture, or you haven't resolved parts of the painting enough, and that is usually something that I experience still even after 29 years of working with watercolor, and it's something that I would suggest you just try to push through. You keep working on it, keep looking at the different parts of your painting, and hopefully at some point it'll start to feel more resolved, and you won't feel like that it's not working. So there are paintings though that I've done where even after what I consider kind of it being done, that I'm maybe not as happy with the outcome, and maybe I don't ever do anything with those, or you know, they may just not get entered in an exhibition or go to a gallery or something. But yeah, in general, paintings can have that ugly duckling stage. I'm not sure why I had my ruler there, but maybe I don't know. It's going to say maybe I'm adjusting the border a little bit, but... And you can see I've taken more notes at this point, so there's more writing on the different borders. Depending on the painting also, I will do a color study and write notes for that. For this painting, because I had painted flamingos before, it was more about the color mixes and things, so I had good notes on that. I didn't do a color study per se for this one. I think I may have painted some sections of things here and there, but color studies can be very helpful in helping you figure out your process, what you're painting first, second, third. They do not have to be very big. They could be 3x6 or 5x7. They don't have to be as detailed. It's more just like working in a sketchbook, basically, sort of giving you information. Also, doing a black and white sketch of your painting could help you see your values and help you kind of get in your head where things need to be darker, lighter, that kind of thing prior to doing the painting. I do that sometimes, but I don't do it as much anymore, partly because I feel like I'm pretty strong on my value sense now, and but there are times if my painting is not working that would be very beneficial to just pause and try things and see if I need to adjust something. So I'm still trying to figure out the values on that back or middle bird and that darker orange. And while I'm doing that, so you can see I'm kind of working around the painting still. If I'm not quite sure what I need to do in an area, then I'll go work on some other area. And that helps me move through the painting, but maybe not over work an area or stress about something. It's just like get away from it, leave it alone for a little bit and come back to it. So now you can see I'm removing the masking fluid, and I tend to wait to remove masking fluid until I'm happy with that area, and if I need to go back into an area and put some color around a shape that used to be masked, I just want to make sure that it's not going to be too hard to paint in that area. So if it's a really detailed area that I had the masking fluid on, sometimes I will wait till I'm pretty sure that it's done. You can come back into an area and put color over an area, and I always adjust the masking fluid. So you might notice that I have been changing my brush. You might notice that one right there. That's a flat brush with stiffer bristle. Sometimes I will start with that, but most of the time I start with a flat brush with semi-soft bristles. And some water is on the brush, and then I come in. For lines, I will often soften the end of the line, sometimes a little in the middle. It depends on where the shape is. Sometimes your whole shape needs to have softer edges, sometimes maybe just a little bit of it. And then sometimes it needs to be hard edged, but you might need to go in and clean up those edges. So you might need to come back in with a little bit of paint around your unmasked shape and make it nice and clean and make it not look like it was basically cut out or a separate thing from your painting. And because I don't want the unmasked area to stand out too much. So I want to make it nice and clean and make it just look like it was always a part of the painting, and that it's not gonna, I don't necessarily want people to walk away going, oh, I know where she used masking fluid. I want them to look at the whole painting and not my techniques that I've used. One of the things that I'm trying to portray in this scene is not only the vibrant color of the birds, but also the look of sunlight. So for me, having something that's got some strong light changes is really fun to work and paint. And so I want to make sure that I'm creating that look of light and shadow. So that flat brush that I'm using right now, I can also use it to lift or soften edges. And so in there, I'm using it with a little water to adjust those, actually not adjust, but to soften some of those edges or lift a little color. That shadow that came over the bird's neck was hard to describe, and I did keep going back to it here and there, trying to make adjustments and make it work. And then I think I also darkened that neck a little more than what the photo shows so that it wouldn't stand out too much. And then softening some edges where I had lifted the mask there, or maybe I painted around those lighter ones, but I'm softening their edges where I need to. The other thing you can do if you're working in an area that has lots of little shapes and details and things is you might take a few pieces of paper and basically block off that area so that you're only focused on that one section, because sometimes we get confused where we are, and it can help you kind of orient and decide what you're working on at that point. Also remember, in general, you don't necessarily need to paint every feather, every mark, every brick on a building. It depends on what you're trying to portray. It might depend on where you want the viewer's eye to focus. And something that is more detailed will pull the eye more than an area that is softer and not as detailed. So thinking about those kinds of things as you're working around your painting, or even before you do your painting, is a good exercise to make sure that you're controlling how the viewer kind of moves through your final painting. So in that one, I have my small brush on that neck, and I'm just adding little marks here and there to create the look of feathers. little bit of texture on the neck of that bird. Going back to my big brush, and you can see I'm working on that section again. And I don't know what my mix was, but I'm definitely adding a darker, kind of muted purple in that area to, and it had a lot of water in it, so it wasn't like I was putting it on really heavy pigment, but I wanted more purple in there, and then I added some orange to those feathers as well to make sure that that entire section was a little darker than what I did have. Now, if you're working in a section like that, you could put water on the paper, put the purple on there. Sorry about the top of my head. Kind of like want to bop myself on the head. Move. So you could, as I was saying, wet the paper, put on your one color, let it dry, then come back later, re-wet that section, and then put on the other color. So you don't necessarily, on a wet-on-wet type of thing, have to put in 2 colors, 3 colors, whatever, however many colors there are, all at once. Sometimes, not sometimes, but a lot of time it will be fresher if you can do it all at once, because they do a little bit of blurring and melding together and that kind of thing. And some colors will lift a little more than others. So also depending on the kind of paint you're using. So if you're using professional grade paint, generally you can go back over them. There are certain colors though that can lift, as I mentioned, more than others. So in general, when I am painting a layer on top of another layer and I use a wet on wet type of way to do that, I'm not brushing really hard with my brush back and forth. I'm just gently swishing the water over the paper, and here it might look a little rougher just because this is moving so quickly. But it's basically just kind of skimming, just letting the water release onto the paper, not dragging it across the surface. And I think that's one of the things to think about if you're newer to watercolor. Watercolor is different than acrylic and oils in that respect. Generally, you don't have to press as hard on watercolor paper or with watercolor because you want it to release from the brush naturally. You don't need to push it onto the canvas or the paper. So definitely here this needed to go darker. In the end, I did not darken this area as dark as the photo was showing me, but I did use that photo to help guide me to know if I needed to go darker. And I did darken over there, so you can see where I was questioning myself earlier. I did come back into that area and darken it again. Okay, so this is the final version of the painting, and I hope that was interesting, and that hopefully that helped you kind of see the process of walking through a scene. And I'll see you next month. Take care. Bye.